All right, and Nikki, feel free to share your screen.
Okay.
Thanks guys for tuning in with us today. Again, like Nikki said, we're gonna do the RR and the RRRR today. Believe it or not, back when that form came out, I remember my manager teaching all of us the new forms, because that year, I forget if it was like 2015 or whatever, they literally had like 8 new forms come out at the same time, and this was one of them. And I remember the thing that she taught us how to do it was she had a picture of a seal with a ball on the top of its head, and she goes, you go art like a seal would do on one of those things in the ocean. Anyhow, that's how I learned the form. So it'll be
that's funny.
for it today.
Okay, let's share that. Okay. Ooh, I was wishing I could have an Irish car bomb, Nicole. Those are my favorite. Okay, this is the request for repair form. So long time ago, there were not 2 forms. You did your request for repair and the seller's response all on the same form. That has now changed. And this is the request for repair form that the buyer fills out. Okay. Anybody have any questions about this form? Just beginning questions. This is the form you fill out once your buyer has done all of their investigations. Hopefully, once you have seen the termite report and you have decided on what repairs that your client wants to be done. All right, at the top of the form, you have request for repair 1, date prepared. This is a request for repair to the purchase agreement. So you put the date that the purchase agreement was signed. We're just going to say it's the 5th of March. On this property, buyer and seller's name. Seller. Okay. I know I've gone over this form in the past. The first, number 1 up here, buyer requests that seller, prior to the final verification of conditions, repair or take other specified action for each item listed below or on the attached list dated whatever the day the attached list is. So for this section, you are given in the forms, what is it? 1, 2, 3.
Can you
4.
give me some tea, Ellie? Yeah.
Am I what?
No, you're good. I think somebody was talking. I muted them.
Oh, okay. So they give you seven lines that you can see. If you keep pushing enter at the end of each line, the form still gives you more and more lines to type on.
Many as you want.
Many as you want. You just have to push enter. So if you were going to put like seller to cut trees, did I spell it right? That hang over the garage and hit the windows. And then number 17, seller to replace GXBIs. So see, if as long as I keep pushing enter at the end of the one I want, I'm just going to get more, but it's going to give me so many more lines. So honestly, you don't even need to really do an attached list anymore. Okay, this has kind of become obsolete because you can make a super long list just using these lines.
Niki, just a quick question. With using those lines, if you can't see it on the form, does it auto print or auto populate those other lines where you can see them?
Yes. So what it's going to do, let me see if I pulled one up here. Okay, I'll just show you in this. So once you've done your whole list, once you go into DocuSign, or if you download it onto your computer, which I'm going to show you right now. Bring it over. What it does, the system does for you, it says see text overflow addendum. And then the next page is all your list of documents
Very cool.
of
Okay.
requests.
Nice.
And then this refers back to request for repair paragraph 1A. Now, if maybe your client was an engineer or someone of that sort, if you even used all these lines, it would add another text overflow addendum too. So it'll just keep giving you lines and keep adding text overflow addendums. So the huge reason I really want to stress this is because at the bottom of this text overflow addendum, I don't know if I think you guys can all see this. Let me make it bigger. The foregoing terms and conditions are hereby incorporated in and made part of request for repair paragraph 1A, referred to in the document which this TOA is attached. The undersigned acknowledge receipt of a copy of this TOA. So when the buyer and sellers sign a text overflow addendum, they are just acknowledging receipt of that document. They are not agreeing to any of this stuff. They're just saying that they saw it. Okay. The biggest problem lately that I have is people don't use the enter function and they'll just go, see attached addendum number 1. Okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you addendum. So if I wrote that on my request for repair, and then even if you do this, request for repair, you did this for the purchase contract, we said 3.5, and you did 1, 2, 3, whatever. At the bottom of this page, it says the foregoing terms and conditions are hereby agreed to, and the undersigned acknowledge receipt of a copy of this document. So when you use this addendum, at any point in a transaction, when the seller and the buyer sign it, they are agreeing to all the terms and conditions up here. If you use this addendum in conjunction with a request for repair, just a list of what the buyer wants, you don't want your seller to sign it if they're not gonna agree to it. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Because I am getting this all the time, and it's like, my seller's not gonna sign this entire list if they don't agree to the entire list. So if you use the text overflow addendum, nobody's agreeing to anything. They're just acknowledging receipt that they have seen all of those items. Okay, so please, if I can stress anything, it's do not use addendums for a list of requests for repairs.
Okay.
All right.
So whatever is populated along with the list that we make.
With the text overflow, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. If you have a list of repairs, and you also want the seller to do section 1.
It's right there on
termite.
number. Yeah.
number B.
B.
And and you are supposed to fill in the date and the report. And the
Mhm.
reason for that is sometimes sellers will give you, or listing agents will give you reports that were done like 6 months ago, or maybe a year and a half ago. And then you do your own. You want the most recent report. So make sure you put in the date. I'll just say this one was the 1st, and it's Euro termite. Okay. Section 1 is most often the section that is repaired by the seller, and usually section 2 would be the buyers. Nick,
Yes.
section 1 is active infestation,
Yep.
right?
Section
And
one
section,
is, yeah, section 1 is stuff that's wrong right now. Section 2 is usually preventative maintenance, like for the future. So that's why we usually ask for section 1. We don't ask for section 2. And keep in mind, guys, like this whole section 1, section 2 thing being on the request for repairs is a relatively new thing in the last few years when they got rid of the wood destroying pest addendum. Terry's asking if you can make the screen any bigger, Nikki. I'm not sure if you can or can't. Oh, wow, there you go. So I love to basically put the termite on the request for repairs. I almost never put termite in my contracts, and normally because I don't want the lender to make it like a condition of the sale, because like what if we do need tenting before we close and you can't get a variance, or you can't get a, what do we call it, a variance, Nikki? I forget the terminology, but you basically can't get it waived until after the close of escrow. It just causes a lot of problems. So I love to have it on my request for repairs so I can negotiate on it instead. Again, if you have it in your purchase agreement, you're guaranteed to have the work done if the seller signs off on it. But if it's not in your contract, you can ask for it on this form.
okay. So I definitely think if you're going FHA or VA, you never want to put termite work onto your contract. I do have people usually ask for the termite report in a purchase contract only because you don't want to wait until the request for repair is going out to get a copy of that report. And I have had a number of times where it wasn't on the contract and then the seller just refused to get a report and the buyer or the agent ended up paying for one. So definitely don't put that whether you want clearance on the purchase contract, put that on the request for repairs. Okay.
So just, sorry, can I ask a quick question? Sorry, guys. So just to reiterate, it's okay to report, or, because I was hearing what Nick was saying about not putting it at all, but it's okay to put the report part, or do you see what I mean? It's okay to ask for a report, or you're saying not at all, just get it on the.
When I write purchase contracts and it is a property that has a lot of wood and what looks like wood damage, I do in the contract ask for a report, and then on the request for repairs is when I ask for the work.
But the lender, is that going to be an issue with the lender because you've asked for the report, or not necessarily? That's just when we ask for the section 1, correct?
Usually it's an issue if you ask for the clearance in the contract.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I was just clarifying. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Is somebody still not having, is everyone able to see the screen?
Yeah, I was telling Terry that the screen's pretty massive, so I said it has to be the view on her end because it's pretty big.
Were you
So,
saying something,
Oh.
Nicole?
Okay. All right. So if you want a list of items to repair and you want your termite section 1 completed, and the buyer wants a credit of $3,000, and the buyer wants the property to be purchase price to be reduced to $549.
keep in mind, I want to just mention something real quick, Nikki, and I don't know if you're going to cover it, but when you guys ask for credits, have justification as to why you're asking for that credit. Like if there's a plumbing issue under the sink, Okay, don't just throw out like $1,000. Like, talk to a plumber, get a handyman out there, talk to somebody who can actually fix that and provide some kind of evidence, because shooting in the dark with credits is never fun. I've seen a lot of agents do that where they're like, well, I just don't have time. I'm like, well, you got to call the listing agent and ask for time, or ask them what they think it would cost to repair that. Like, work together, but try to have some kind of evidence behind what credits you're going to ask for. They will go a lot farther than just shooting in the dark. So
Perfect. So that leads me to this last section too. For credits or for reduction of price, you need to include Tom Bittner bid. Jeff Stewart's.
good luck getting Tom out to a property, man.
It was just the first name that popped into my head.
I'm just teasing.
Chimney sweep. Sorry, I spelled that wrong. Inspection. What else can we do?
Sorry, guys, I may be muting you, but I'm getting a lot of background noise. So if you have questions, just unmute yourselves. I'm just getting background feedback.
So any inspection or report that supports what you're asking for, attach them. Always attach them and give them to the seller. Just like Nick said, just sending a report, just sending a request for repair with no supporting documents, it doesn't really mean anything. You can say something's $5,000, but if you don't have the HVAC bid or the chimney bid that says that, you know, the chimney is falling apart, that $3,000 doesn't mean anything. So always list them here and send them with your request for repairs. Okay. So I showed you how to do that list. And here's the other thing that I've been doing lately is we want a credit for $3,000. But I want to tell the seller why I want that credit. So I have been doing this. Buyer requests a credit 1 fee for the following items. And then I just list those items. Sorry, that little thing is in front of my 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm not checking this because I don't want the seller to repair them. I'm just saying we want a credit for these items, and I reference 1 fee for the amount of the credit. Okay. Because if you check up here, they want the seller to repair. You can check all of them. You can check one of them. You can check whatever you want. If you're going to check the seller credit portion, please check with the lender to make sure that the credit you're asking for is in the allowable credit amounts. This doesn't happen so much anymore, but you need to know if you're going to ask for $7,000 in closing costs credit, make sure you've checked with the lender, and that's an allowable amount. Okay. If you're going to ask for a purchase price to be reduced, this is just for informational purposes, guys. Just know that your commission is going to be coming off of the new price. You don't get the commission off of the old price. I've had just a few times where people got surprised about that. So you will get an amended commission instructions if the purchase price change. All right. Okay, so you as the buyer, you're going to send out this request for repair, and in the same email, you're going to put all the inspections or bids that you got, and you're going to send it to the seller. And the seller is going to go over that. The listing agent's going to go over that with the seller. They will respond. The first one, seller agrees to all of the buyer's requests provided in writing. Buyer removes the physical inspection contingency, or buyer removes those contingencies identified on the attached contingency removal form, which must be signed by the buyer. Okay, so if the buyer signs down here, they are agreeing to remove the physical inspection contingency, regardless of whether or not they sign the actual contingency removal form. If you check this box up here, it may be because the appraisal has also come in and you want them to remove more than just the physical inspection contingency. And the big part too is III, buyer releases seller and brokers from any loss, liability, expense, claim, or cause of action regarding the disclosed condition of the property. When the buyer signs down here, they're saying that they're agreeing to everything and the repairs, and they release liability to the seller and the brokers. So that was the easy one. Seller agrees, sends off the contingency removal, and then buyer signs the bottom of the form. When that all happens, everything's complete and you move forward. Or seller does not agree to any of the buyer's requests. If that is the case, the buyer can come back and do a request for repair too. Or the seller's just not going to do anything. So there's two ways to go with that. Or seller responds to the buyer's request on the attached car form. Arr. That's how I remember it. So this would be request for repairs number 1. If the seller said no, they don't agree to any of that, you could come back with a request for repair number 2. Okay. Or seller responds, and then we would go to the seller's response to request for repair. Now, I know at the beginning I talked about this text overflow addendum. If the seller had agreed to our $3,000 credit, that is when you would use an actual addendum. Let me pull this over. Okay, can you all see that? If the buyer asked for a credit of $3,000 or $5,000 and the seller agreed to it, you then do an actual addendum form. Seller to credit buyer $5,000 for reoccurring and non-reoccurring closing costs. Both buyer and seller sign it, and this is what is given to escrow and the lender. Okay, the addendum makes it an addition to the purchase contract. You're adding a new term to the purchase contract. Okay. So any reduction in price or any credits need to be on an actual addendum. Everybody with me there?
Are you going to go over that repairs should not be on here?
Yes.
Oh, yes, please. Yes. Repairs go on the request for repair form or the text overflow. Only credits and only reduction in purchase price go on an addendum.
So money goes on an addendum, so escrow, lender, everybody can be notified, but not repairs. We don't want to put on here that all the GFCIs need to be installed in the bathroom and kitchen. We don't want to say that there's a leak under the sink that needs to be corrected. None of that stuff goes on anything that the lender can see. That's why the request for repairs form is completely separate. So when you guys are handling work to be done, we don't want to freak anybody out. Now, keep in mind, if you accidentally send documents to like even escrow, like, you know, request for repairs documents, it's their obligation to share it with people. So you don't want to send stuff where there's work to be done that's not going strictly between like buyer's agent and listing agent. That's where that stays until you actually have an agreement. And if there's any money being exchanged, like the example Nikki has, that goes on an addendum. Okay. Just to clarify that, because I've seen that too, where they put all their requests for repairs on the addendum. I'm like, no, they stay separate.
Yeah. And never, 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 the lender, escrow do not need to
Excuse
see
me.
property inspections. Yes.
Just to clarify, so you have the agreement between the buyer and seller, and then you would send it to escrow, not before?
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
thanks.
However, I will say this, because sometimes it does take a while to get signatures. If you have done your request for repair, everyone agreed to the $3,000, and you have sent over to the other side an addendum like this, I always CC escrow when I send the addendum to the other side. And I call the lender and let them know that there is going to be a credit.
Okay,
Does that make sense? Because escrow and lenders need to know this information as soon as possible. So we've agreed on the request for repairs. I've drawn up the addendum. My client signed it. I'm going to send it to the other side. I'm going to CC escrow when I send it, and I'm going to call the lender and let them know it's happening. That way, nobody's surprised. The lender can make sure that it's on the closing disclosure when it goes out.
so you
It just
CC,
really,
you just tell them, or you CC, you send the addendum?
I CC escrow on the addendum, and then I tell the lender.
Okay,
Yeah. Okay, and then once everybody's got it fully executed, escrow will send it to the lender as well.
okay, great.
But at least everyone's notified that this is what's going on.
Nikki, I have a
All right.
question about the
Sure.
lender and the sending the inspections or just anything, just for curiosity. If something was wrong and the lender was to see these things, what is an example of like why is that an issue? I mean, I understand, don't send it. I have never done that. I'm just asking, can they like,
I
they
had
can stop the
I had
loan or
one-
something or what? Yeah. thanks.
I had one where somehow the lender got a copy of it, and it basically said that the entire house needed a new roof. And then the lender said they wouldn't loan on it unless the repairs were made.
And
The
keep
lender
in mind-
doesn't, go ahead.
I was gonna say, keep in mind too, like with what Nikki's saying, and the other thing too is like they don't just want a new roof. Like they don't just want a new roof. They want it to be done by one of their like sometimes preferred vendors or contractors. I had a leak one time on a house that got discovered, and they started calling out like we needed moisture checks, mold inspections, all kinds of crazy stuff. And they don't even want it done by just anybody. It has to be from one of their preferred people, which usually costs more. It's crazy when that kind of stuff happens. It's a total deal killer. Not always, but sometimes.
Or the other thing is they don't want to lend for the price that the house is at, because there's so many things that are wrong with that house.
Yep.
Which is definitely things underwriters will call out. So that's why we don't ever want to give the banks. And it's not lender fraud to not pass on inspections. You're just, it's not in their purview, I guess. is the
And
word
keep
I'm
in mind,
looking
guys, too, like you'll notice, especially if you're a listing agent and you're reviewing offers for the seller and you're going over stuff, you'll see a lot of people who've been in this business a long time. They'll write buyer's inspection, home inspection under item 7A3 in the contract. I always counter and delete that out because anything in the purchase agreement can be called upon. So I just always want you guys to understand that too. Don't write your home inspection in your contract either, going off this same point. And if you see it, counter it out. And most people put it under 7A as an apple 3 in their purchase agreement, if they put it in there.
Yeah, don't put it, there's a whole big section in the contract that talks about what inspections the buyer can do. You don't need to then call it out in the numbers that the buyer is going to pay for an inspection. It already says that in the purchase contract.
That's right. Actually, in item 12, it does that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to pretend we're the listing agents now, and we have gotten a request for repair from the buyer. Request for repair number 1, our seller's response, and buyer replied to request for repair number 1. This is in response to request for repair number 1, dated 3/18. Okay. Seller agrees. You check all that apply. To all of the buyer's requests for repairs in number 1, except we'll do everything, but we're not going to replace the water heater. Okay. And then there could be more than that, but that's just an example. At close of escrow to credit buyer $5,000. Reduce the purchase price to this number or other. Trying to think of examples of what goes in other. Sometimes people ask for verification that something's working, and this is where you would put in other. HVAC guy came and did what? Verified that air conditioner is working. See the attached bid. Okay. Right here, it spells out what you were just talking about. Any credit included in this paragraph is separate from and shall not reduce or supersede any other credit in the agreement unless specially agreed to in writing. So if in the purchase contract, you have a $3,000 credit, any credit that happens with the request for repair or seller's response is added to the other credit. So it would now be a total of $6,000.
And you guys got to be careful on this too, like to go off what Nikki's saying, like if you have a client who's asking for closing costs, let's say you get your offer accepted and you're asking, what's my screen doing? You're asking for closing costs, right? Let's say you're asking for $10,000 in closing costs and the lender only allows so much credit. And then you negotiate, let's say another 6,000 or 7,000 on here. You got to be careful at some point because yeah, it's all cumulative and that's great for your client. But at the end of the day, if there's not enough closing costs to be covered, you might be better off asking for a purchase price, or maybe the lender's only going to allow so much credit. So that might be a conversation. I don't see that happening a lot in this market because everything is so aggressive, but that is a question to ask if you start to almost over negotiate what your client can actually get.
I have had that quite a few times happen.
Yeah.
And that extra money just goes away.
It's dead. Yeah.
So if you get 10,000 and only 7 is allowed, that $3,000 just goes away. It's also another thing I'm seeing too, where the agents are crediting, the agents and the seller and the request for repair, all those credits add up. So it's best from the get-go to verify how much allowable credits you have. Okay, so you as the listing agent and seller fill out this. Seller's agreement only applies if buyer, its default, removes the inspection contingency or removes those contingencies identified on the attached CR form. That would be if you want more than just investigation, inspection contingency. And again, releases seller and brokers from any loss, liability, expense, claim, or cause of action regarding the disclosed condition of the property. Okay. You send that over to the buyer. The buyer accepts the response, is the default, and they would sign here agreeing. Buyer accepts seller's response with the following modification. You could say buyer wants $3,500 in credits instead of the $3,000. Or buyer withdraws request for repair number 1 and makes a new request in the attached request for repair number 2. So here's the big thing with this. If you withdraw your request for repair number 1, you're withdrawing all of it. You're not keeping some of it and doing a new additional one. You're withdrawing everything. So you would need to rewrite everything that you want on the new request for repair number 2. That makes sense? And if you do withdraw it, that first request for repair and this seller's response need to be in your file. They don't just go away because you moved on to a new request for repair number 2. Okay, and if you do that, if buyer accepts seller's response 1A, or seller agrees below to the modification, then buyer will be deemed to have withdrawn all requests for items that the seller has not agreed to, and hereby removes the physical inspection contingency, or hereby removes those contingencies on the attached car form, and agrees to the release above, which is the release of liability. If this was checked and there was a modification, the seller would then need to agree to the modification or does not agree to the modification, and the buyer may submit a new request for repair. It's been a while since I've seen anything go beyond request for repair and seller's response number 1.
I was actually going to say the same thing, Nikki. I was going to say, you know, I know we have to go over the whole form, but honestly, guys, most times it goes from the RR to the RRRR, and then usually it stops most times. So just know that like this is here as a provision, just in case you need to carry on to another RR.
Most of the times those kind of things happen for me is when it's a buyer's market.
Yeah.
And definitely with the low inventory right now, that's not the market we're in. So most of that is just for future reference. Okay, so I want you to look at, not the buyer counteroffer, I want you to look at the contingency removal. Okay. Buyer investigation contingency is the physical inspection, all investigation other than the physical inspection, and the entire investigation contingency. So the default one they're talking about in the request for repair and the seller's response is just number 3. Sorry, we jumped out of there. If you wanted them to remove the reports and disclosures, the preliminary title, if they've gotten their HOA or if they've gotten their appraisal, then you need to make sure that you add a contingency removal form with all those items that you want them to remove. Because usually by the time you're negotiating repairs, the prelim, they've gotten the prelim, they've gotten the reports and disclosures. Sometimes you've gotten the appraisal back. So this is a little one of my pet peeves in real estate. Everybody signs a contract saying that they're going to remove the contingencies in a certain date, but somehow a lot of people won't remove contingencies unless they're asked or given the form. So if you've gotten to the request for repair and the appraisal has been done, you've sent over all the disclosures, including your AVID, and the prelim has been received, make sure you send a contingency removal, having the buyer remove all those items. Okay. That's how you, on the listing side, represent your seller to the best of your ability, is have the buyer remove everything that they can at that point in time. Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? None. This is a, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the only other thing I kind of wanted to highlight on here is like, you know, I don't know, are you gonna show us a bad example?
Yes, I was just going to show you really quickly. So this is
Okay.
a request for repair.
Perfect.
Buyer signed it. Seller said they have a response. The buyer signed the bottom. Buyer does not need to sign the bottom here. If seller is doing a response on an RRRR, buyer does not sign right there. Okay. They actually sent this over to us with both of these signatures already on the form. So when you do a request for repair, the buyer only signs the top portion. Okay, not both portions.
So Nikki, scroll up to the top because this is kind of what I was going to mention anyways. I'm glad you pulled this up because at the very top on request for repair, you know, this is a very interesting way to highlight like terms of an agreement where it says like correct per report. I've never seen that, but see how it says under item 1224, inspect and repair 220-volt receptacle. See how it says under 1513, confirm no leak issue. Guys, if there's a leak issue, you should be the one to inspect it. Does that make sense? And if there's a issue with the 220 receptacle, you should have the electrician out and inspecting it, right? What I don't like about this is you're having the seller, the opposite side of the transaction, further investigate these items for your buyer, you know, and that's, I think, where sometimes we really, I know sometimes we're pressed for time, I guess is what I want to say. And if you just take that extra time to communicate and say, listen, there's some electrical concerns that are an issue and there's a leak that's an issue. I want to get my plumber out there. I want to get my electrician. I feel like most sellers or listing agents will work with you on allowing you to do that, even in this market. You need to ask though. I don't think it's wise to have the other side investigating for you. That was all I wanted to say, Nikki.
And, you know, honestly, it's not their job to investigate.
Yeah.
It's the buyer's job.
This is the weirdest request for repair I've ever seen in my life.
Oh my gosh, this is, there are so many issues right here.
Why would you say something's correct on a request for repairs? Like, that's just weird.
And the other thing is this stuff, I don't get it so much, but every now and then I do. I mean, this was dated February. No listing agent wants to search in a report to find out what number 419 is. I've seen it before where I get this whole list and it just says number 39 per report, number 42 per report, blah, 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 blah. And then they're making the listing agent go search for that. We want happy, shiny listing agents. If you're going to say something like this, you say number 42 per the inspection report, seller to replace grating in the kitchen. So you not only, you've put where they can find it in the report, but you're also telling them what it is. Okay. This stuff is just, no, it's not their job to search and find what you want repaired. It's your job to write what you want repaired.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then this one, they did a pretty good job. They said they're gonna do everything except for the numbers. And there is no current leaking in garage. That was a previous leak before we moved in. Okay. So there is that one. Okay, here's another example. So this one did what I said, which is they described the repair and they said where you could find it.
I like that. I like when you quote the item, the section and the page number and all that, and you're like, hey, but this is what it is. That's etiquette right there in this business. I like that a lot better.
I do too. And I know that almost all of the agents that I work with, when they get something like this, they're much happier than when they get just, here's this list, go find what we want.
Not to mention that the inspection report is like 80 pages long. So you're flipping through it and trying to understand. And sometimes they'll put multiple issues on one page in a report. So you're kind of like, yeah, that's just not cool.
Okay, so here's one where they did it right. the request for repair, see text overflow addendum. Seller and buyer both signed, and seller agreed to all of those items. And buyer removed the inspection contingency. Okay.
Remember too, guys, that we're trying to stick to health and safety issues on this, these requests for repairs. We normally don't want to touch cosmetic issues. You know, when your client walks in there, they see everything that's cosmetic, right? It's kind of interesting on this one. It said something about touching up paint, and it just made me like think to myself, like, oh gosh. Try to stick to health and safety issues. If there's electrical items that are an issue, that's a health and safety, right? Plumbing, health and safety, all of those things are health and safety hazards. When you start to say like, hey, the carpet in the living room needs to be replaced, it's like, whoa, right? I saw touch-up paint on this here, and I'm thinking to myself, dude, grab a paintbrush on the weekend and call it a day. What's wrong with you? But we don't ask for stuff like that, right? Like that's just not, we don't do that in this business, okay? I mean, here's what I'll tell you. You start to get your client trained to ask for stuff like that, you're going to really have an angry seller. And what I notice is that when you ask for cosmetic stuff, because it's possible, you usually get a lot of pushback on the stuff that they probably would have rather had fixed anyways. So again, it's really very much a dance. It's a give and take situation. So only ask for the stuff that's pertinent to them actually living in that home. Try to stick to that and let your client know. That's a good way to combat your client when they say, hey, I want this done or this done or this done. Or, well, hey, will the seller help us out with this? Well, does it really fall under health and safety? If it doesn't, hey guys, I feel like we're going to get pushback on that. Tell your buyer that. You know, I think it's better to be honest with them than to fabricate and say, well, we can ask and try. I don't know. You do know. You know what's going to fly and not fly. So
now in this just case, the reason they did ask for that was because the seller wanted to remove shelves that were built into the wall. So in that case, they did discuss it beforehand, and the buyer said, okay, fine, you can remove and take the shelves, but I want you to fix the holes.
See, and that's a unique circumstance. And one time I had a client or a seller, I was on the buyer side, and the seller flat out told us, hey, listen, I need to remove my entertainment system from the living room. And they said underneath it, the floor is totally destroyed. I just want you to know that. And we were like up front before we even got very far. I was like, well, how do they feel about maybe giving a credit? They said, well, we're happy to replace the whole living room carpet or, you know, give a credit or whatever. And my client actually went for having the carpet replaced. Like that happened, but that was a unique situation agreed to up front and communicated about, right? So that's a cosmetic situation, just like what Niki's talking about, where if it's out in the open and everybody's cool with it, that's different. But I don't want you to hit people with like remodel jobs if it's not part of an actual discussion already.
Yeah, and the other thing you got to think about is I've been seeing a lot of reports where people say things like, it's not up to code, it's not up to code, it's not up to code. Okay, if it's a house that was built in 1920s, there are going to be things that aren't up to code. It doesn't mean that it's going to fall down around you. It meant that it was built to code when the house was built. And since then, the codes have changed. But it's not necessarily a safety issue to make that house up to code. And I think people need to convey that to buyers that are buying older houses.
And I'll give you guys an example of that. I kind of laughed at my inspector when I bought my house. I have French doors off of my dining room, and there's a little balcony space there. And there's like, you know, there's a little like cage, like ironwork that was done in the 1920s. Beautiful ironwork. You would never touch the ironwork. Well, sure enough, on the inspection report, it said safety hazard. Kids could basically fall through the bars. And I'm like laughing because I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? You'd be a fool to touch this beautiful 1920s work. But of course, it's not up to code from whenever they've updated the code, right? So that's another one that Niki's, I think that's a good thing to point out, because inspectors will call a lot of stuff out, guys, that's not up to code. Doesn't mean that it needs to be fixed, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
Nick and Niki,
And then
got
I
a couple of
guess-
questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Okay, so just another thing really quick. If you have an FHA or VA loan, and the bank has called out repairs, you would use the FHA or VA notice and addendum. And that is where it says that the lender is requiring these items to be fixed. So in those cases, you could have one of these, and you could also have a buyer's request for repair, just so you know. Okay, go ahead, Harold.
Let's see. So we have a condo with a 38-year-old furnace in it, and the inspector said the normal life is 20 to 25 years. It's well beyond that. I know they'll have a home warranty for 1 year, but how would we request some credit for replacing that? I mean, the previous owner lived there for like 20 years, so they got plenty of use out of it.
I would just say,
It's still working?
Yeah, it's still working. She noted some rust and some, there was a moisture stain at the bottom of it. We had a handyman take a look at replacing it, and we haven't got that quote back yet, but yeah, it does work.
So, well, Nikki,
that's
you,
kind of
yeah, you talk about it. I'll give my 2 cents in a second.
that's kind of a tough one. I do know that has come up a lot during my years in real estate, especially with like the older homes. But a lot of times I get pushback from the sellers if it's working fine for them. They don't necessarily want to replace something that does work just because your client thinks that it's going to fall apart in the future. Now, I definitely think if you gave that invoice and the person that did the bid called out like the moisture at the bottom, or if there were specific things, but it's a little harder to get seller to replace an item just because it's old.
Yeah, and you know, I've seen like the in-floor heaters in Lakewood that are 60, 70 years old and they still work fine. But this was a newer build. It was well, it was 38 years ago that the home was built, so it was a new furnace then. But yeah, back in the 80s, I don't know that stuff's gonna last that long anymore.
Remember that when we're talking about stuff like this, we have to ask ourselves, is it broken? Is the system actually, in trouble today? If it's not in trouble today and we're just speculative of the future, it's kind of like asking for Section 2 termite work, right? It's like preventative maintenance, right? It's the same thing. We don't usually ask for Section 2. Why? Because it's something that's probably going to take place in the future, right? So the seller is there to usually credit or work with you on stuff. And again, they don't have to, but work with you on items that are actually of a concern today. So realistically, if you were to come to me on like a property I was selling, and you were to ask me, hey, the water heater's at its life expectancy, I'd be like, there's hot water all the time. If there's no issues today, you really got to get a good handle on your client with letting them know if it's not of a concern today, it's really not something that needs to be technically repaired. And remember, we are doing a request for repair. So I personally would side more with the seller on something like that, where I wouldn't want to give a credit, but you can ask, you can try.
Yeah, we were kind of leaning that way too, and we explained if it have a problem in the first year, your home warranty would probably cover it. But they're just like, well, yeah, but 2 years down the road, that could be $5,000 or $6,000. That, and they're worried about the future, which I guess everybody does.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing too, you need to make sure is if you were coming with maybe only that as a request for repair or as a credit, but make sure when you guys talk to your clients that you clarify the things that are really important. And if that is the most important thing to them, then ask for a credit.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's just that they were, the buyer wants to make sure that they're not getting stuck with a bill. I had one other question. So I may have missed you talking about it, but so when you check, you're on the request for repair, you check, you check the first box 1A, you write down a handful of items. Would you use like item 5 to say in lieu of repairs, buyer requests closing, recurring and non-recurring closing costs of X dollars, or would you use the checkbox C?
Checkbox C.
So I always, in that case, can you see my thing right?
Yeah.
I would say, buyer requests a credit 1C for the following items and put those, and then I just check C and write $5,000.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I do it just like that because, and you could write buyer requests a credit in lieu of repairing the following items if you wanted to put it that way.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? So quiet. Okay, so we all remember that we don't really need, if you want to do a list and you don't want to use the enter right here, it's absolutely okay to, on the attached list, and just do it on a Word document and have both the buyer and seller sign that. But since they've changed it and they just allow me to keep adding more and more lines, I don't ever use lists anymore. I just have it all go on the text overflow addendum. Okay, so I'm going to go back to, because I want to emphasize this because I hear this so much from lenders and escrow. Please, if you guys have agreed to a credit, let them know as soon as possible. Even if they don't have the fully executed form, just let them know. Because once they've sent out that CD and you come to them with a credit, they're going to have to reissue a new closing disclosure, and it's going to push your close of escrow date out. So as soon as you have agreed to credits, let the escrow and lender know about them, even if you don't have the fully executed forms yet. Okay, make sure that you are representing your buyer or your seller by removing the contingencies that are available at that time. On the buyer side, if you can't remove all the contingencies, remove what you can and give an extension of time. On the seller side, make sure that you're asking for the buyer to remove everything that they are able to remove. Keep track of those timelines. Call, make sure you're asking about if you haven't heard from an appraiser as a listing agent, you need to contact everyone. Hey, I haven't heard from the appraiser. Has the appraiser been ordered? Like, it's up to you guys to stick to asking what is in the contract timeline and to protect your clients in the best way possible. Okay. Anything else, Nick?
I think that's it.
Okay. Oh, and I just want to say, because this is coming up a couple times lately, buyer has to give the sellers a copy of the report. It's in the contract. Even if they bought them, they still need to give them to the seller. And if you have the seller and it falls out of escrow, you have to give all of the reports that you have to the new buyers. Okay. I just had an issue with this recently. You have to give all those previous buyer inspections when you have them. And I literally had one where the listing agent insisted that they didn't have the previous buyer's inspection. And then the seller at the inspection said, oh, do you want the previous buyer's inspection? Because I have a copy. So, just make sure, disclose, disclose, disclose. That's all.
All right, guys. Thank you, Nikki. Have a fabulous day.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Nick.